Hey there, it's Silver. This is Frogmonster. So this is a first-person Metroidvania, believe it or not, with a couple of other elements sort of in here making up an interesting mixture. And you're in a pretty fascinating world. The idea is there are these sort of godlike beings in this world, and one of them has created you. You're an adorable frog thing, and the other one is sort of going crazy and creating monsters and stuff, and it's your task to figure out why they're doing this, if they had like some bad shellfish or something, and the other option is, of course, to find them directly and actually try to stop them. So the whole thing takes place in this really inventive, charming world where everything looks a bit odd. All of the denizens of this world are close to recognizable creatures, but not quite, so a lot of them look familiar, but still a bit odd. And some of the enemies and stuff are actually a little bit horrifying, and some of the bosses especially, depending on the area you're in. But overall, the atmosphere of this game is one that is sort of equal parts whimsical and foreboding. The interface takes a little bit of explaining, but luckily once you've actually played the game for a few minutes, it all becomes very obvious what everything does. So the three symbols on the left side of the screen are your spells. You have 3 different spells equipped, and this is actually your main method of healing, believe it or not. They do damage, but they also give you health back. The blue meter below those is your mana gauge, which you use to cast spells, and the green meter is, of course, your health. And on the right, the orange meter is the number of shots that are in the weapon you're currently holding, and the red meter is the number of reloads you have for that particular weapon. Being a frog, you can jump very high in this game right from the start, so one of the usual Metroidvania things of blocking you with really high jumps isn't done quite as much in this game just because you can jump so high already. You'll also quickly get access to a dash, which does cover quite a bit of ground and can be used in midair to help you cover larger distances, but it doesn't pause you in the air mid-fall like a lot of dashes do in games like this, so you have to use it at the beginning of your sort of arc upward in order to get good distance, because if you use it while you're falling downwards, you'll just sort of dash down. Importantly, you also have a tongue, because you are a frog, and this tongue is used for several of your abilities, like the ability to climb striped walls, or the ability to use it like a grappling hook and swing across areas that you'll get later on. But you also use it as your main interaction tool, interestingly enough. If you want to pick up a bug, you gotta lick it. If you want to flip a switch, lick it. If you want to talk to someone, you gotta lick them, just like real life. And the world that you're in is a pretty large interconnected world. You have a sort of adorable hand-drawn map thing that you can use. It's not super crazy useful because it doesn't show you detail of each area individually, but it does show you how each area interconnects with the others, which is very important for a Metroidvania since you're going to be doing a lot of backtracking and back and forth and stuff like that. And also there are these sort of hub areas that you're going to want to visit many times, these city areas that you'll get to eventually. So it is a pretty active and large world, and each area is quite a bit different than the others. They all have some really nice music. That's another good part of the audio-visual presentation of this game. Not only does it look very charming and quite cool because of this sort of detailed voxely look, but also, I don't know if they're actually voxels or not, but that is sort of the appearance. And the music is great. The music has a lot of atmosphere to it. Some of it's really genuinely creepy, like actual horror game creepy in some areas, whereas others have this sort of odd, wandering feel to them. Overall, the tracks they give the impression of sort of a lost world that is very mysterious. And also the sound effects are hilarious. The sound effects kind of sound like they were made by someone's mouth. I don't know if they actually were or not, but a lot of them do have that vibe. And you'll start to recognize the various enemy callouts in each area to help you understand, what is spawning and what you need to look out for and stuff. It's definitely a very charming game in terms of how it looks and sounds. This is a shooter, so you do have a gun, actually have several different guns, and you'll start out with a revolver that does pretty solid damage, is nice and accurate, and has infinite ammo with, of course, 6 shots per reload. And this is a weapon that you can always fall back on, given that you'll always have ammo for it, and the fact that you can't hold very much ammo in this game for your other weapons, so you will need the infinite ammo weapon as a standby pretty often. But as you complete new areas and of course find secrets and stuff, you can find other weapons. Some of these are just given to you as a part of the story once you clear certain bosses and stuff like that, and others are actually from like side quests and stuff. So there's quite a few weapons to unlock, but you get things like a double-barreled shotgun, a bow, a machine gun, a grenade launcher, a flamethrower, and a couple of other things. And some of these weapons also act as ways to unlock extra areas. Like for instance, you'll start to find a lot of spider webs that you can't pass, but eventually you'll get the flamethrower, and that will allow you to burn through them and actually see what was beyond them. Also, once you get to the main city, you can do a sort of side quest with a pretty tough boss at the end of it and some really cool environments that will give you access to an upgrade machine that allows you to spend some coins. Every enemy drops coins when they die, and bosses drop a lot. Or rather, this chef dude comes and gives you a bunch of coins for killing the boss because he's making a stew out of them. And there are also these metal ores, these big bundles of ingots that you'll find in chests, usually hidden kind of off the beaten path. And you can bring these coins and ores to this machine and upgrade weapons. Every weapon has 2 mutually exclusive upgrades, which is pretty cool. So you can change your revolver to only have 4 more powerful shots that pierce enemies, or you can have dual machine guns, or you can turn your grenade launcher into a missile launcher, and all sorts of things like that. So there's quite a few different upgrades total once you actually get down to it, because there's a large number of weapons to pick up. So this means that your arsenal is pretty variable, which is cool. There's also the bug system, which is a really cool way to do upgrades that is very thematic for a game where you play as a frog. Also, the word bug is used very liberally here because bugs include things like spiders, like you would expect, but also things like, say, fish or crabs, or even birds if you want to go that far. But the way that it works is when you're exploring around, you can right-click to shoot out your tongue, and this of course lets you interact with stuff, but it also lets you catch bugs. If you tongue a bug, you'll suck it up and eat it. And when you eat a bug for the first time, you unlock it as something that's kind of like Hollow Knight's charms. You can equip them, and each bug takes a different number of slots, and you have a different number of slots. This is one of the things that you can spend your money on at shops in the city, is to buy more slots. And each bug has a different passive effect that it grants you while it's equipped. So you could have one that drastically increases your reload speed, or one that gives you a chance to fire extra bullets every time you shoot a gun. Maybe one that adds an offensive tongue slap every time you reload. And there are these pretty flowery vines that act as your checkpoints, and you can go back to these in order to change your equipped bugs. So you can always change these whenever you want, and you are encouraged to swap these around depending on the area you're in, because some of them are more advantageous against certain enemies or against certain bosses or whatever, and some of the bosses get very challenging in this game. So it's always a good idea to keep a large number of different bugs unlocked so that you can swap out to various different builds to fit whatever you're going up against. And there are loads of different ones to find, from pretty butterflies to these super adorable little frogs of various kinds that exist in different biomes. Maybe you want you want a roof snail? There are also several different relics that you can find throughout the place. Some of these are going to be your major movement abilities that I mentioned earlier, but some of them are also just other things that you can trade to people for side quests or to get some extra money or some things like that. So there's quite a bit that the game can reward you with for exploring, and I found that it usually does a really good job of having a lot of out-of-the-way areas and secrets and stuff for you to find, some hidden switches that unlock little platforming challenges that lead to treasure chests and stuff like that. Now, the spell system I mentioned earlier is kind of interesting because, like I said, it's your main way to heal. You don't get a lot of healing in this game. There are some bugs. Something I didn't mention is that all bugs actually have 2 functions. They have the passive effect that you unlock when you eat them the first time, but they also have a secondary effect that they give you whenever you eat them again later. And some bugs will heal you different amounts when you eat them, but there's not like a ton of them around the place, so you can't use them as like super reliable big heals in battle or anything like that. They're more like little heals that you'll find while exploring around. So your major heals in battle come from your spells, and you can find various spells. A lot of these are found in out-of-the-way hard arenas and stuff like that. They're optional. And you can have 3 equipped at any given time. Each spell has a different mana cost. You gain mana from killing enemies, and you just have to collect it. It slowly decays over time, so you want to collect it as soon as possible when an enemy dies. And then you can use it to cast your various spells, and different spells will heal you for a different amount, but usually it's around 1 HP of healing, one of those green segments per spell cast in general, which is actually kind of a lot because healing is, like I said, is pretty rare in this game, so it's nice to have that reliable set of heals that you can use. And they also tend to be very powerful, I've noticed. Spells in this game are balanced such that a lot of them are super strong. They just aren't things that you can spam because you don't have all that much mana. The world itself is pretty open in terms of its design. Each area is usually quite a long series of passages and corridors and hidden bits and stuff like that, so there's a good amount of variety in each one. You'll also find that the areas are sort of split in terms of their combat, where some of the areas are bits where the enemies are already spawned in when you get there, so you'll see in advance what you're about to fight, and others are the sort of lock you in an arena type where they spawn a bunch of enemies in that weren't there before. At first, most areas will be the sort that have the enemies already in them and are more of a sort of gentle curve of difficulty as you go through them, but as you get into the later game, you'll notice that there are more of those sections where you're locked into a large arena and a bunch of enemies teleport in and try to murder you, and those get really, really, really hard. I think something to say about this game is overall I find it very challenging, like extremely so, probably because of the combination of the fact that you don't have that much health and also that there are a lot of enemies to face, each of which does take a fair amount of damage, not to the point that any of them feel spongy and annoying, but just to the point where they're just strong enough to all be quite threatening. And there are also, of course, the boss fights to talk about. The boss fights in this game are really, really good. They do not have a visible health gauge during battle, but if you die to them, it shows you how much health they had left, which is interesting. So you can get really angry that you almost killed them. The bosses usually have some pretty good-sized arenas. They have some really striking visual design. Some of them are really creepy, like that weird skeletal ant thing with tentacles that all have their own mouths that also sort of bleeds as you shoot it. It's very strange, and it's in like the creepiest area in the game called the Well. It's like this super deep underground cavern that you have to go down this really treacherous elevator to reach, and it's pitch black and you can't see anything except for there's like some candles around the place, so you can barely see just a little bit here and there, although there are these really creepy gaunt white enemies with this big black void for a mouth that sucks up the candle and like flamethrowers it at you. It's a horrible place, but it's a really cool place to go through, definitely memorable, and one of my favorite areas in the game, I think, because of how just atmospheric it is. It's super creepy and weird. Pretty much all the bosses I've noticed have had at least 2 phases. Some have had 3, so they do get pretty complex. They last a fair amount of time. You know, bosses have a good amount of health in this game. They're also really mechanically varied. So I mentioned the horrifying ant skeleton thing, but there's also some really cool ones like, say, Chroma, who is a moth. And you don't actually fight the moth by attacking its body. Instead, you have to hit its wings, which paints them different colors, and you have to paint them several times over in order to actually defeat the moth. So I would say both in terms of visuals and music, and I guess thirdly in terms of mechanics, the boss fights in this game are a definite standout for it, and they're just really memorable and enjoyable fights usually. There's also a giant snake boss with laser eyes, and I think that's the sort of thing that all games should strive to have. But overall, I've significantly enjoyed my time with Frogmonster. I will say that there were some areas that I felt were a little bit overly difficult because they involved doing some pretty tough arena fights in very, not necessarily small arenas, but arenas where the floor kills you and you have tiny little platforms to stand on. Because first-person platforming is not my favorite thing, so combining first-person platforming on tiny little platforms with fighting at the same time can get really frustrating, but luckily there are only a couple of those in certain areas, and they're kind of one-offs in those areas, so you're not constantly doing it throughout. There are also, by the way, some really cool things that this game does with its world in terms of perspective and stuff. So stuff like this, for instance, the entrance to the hive, and also some stuff like the way the fast travel works, where you sort of lick a tree and then it opens up a nice circular sort of knot in the tree and allows you to walk right through without a load screen at all to the area that you're teleporting to. So it's just like a seamless transition across the world. It's very cool. So I can easily recommend Frogmonster for its full price. $20 is a very fair price for this amount of content and this amount of polish. I haven't noticed any major bugs at all, by the way, except for the ones that you catch. And this really is just the kind of game that I love to cover whenever I can, because this was made by one person, and it's the kind of game that can only be made by one person. Like, its really unique set of ideas can only happen when you have a very singular vision from one individual creating something, and that's what we have here. So it's always a joy to play stuff like this because it's just so unique and silly and interesting in a lot of ways. And the whole thing is this super atmospheric, colorful package that's very easy to recommend. So I'll put the link in the description to the Steam store page for Frogmonster if you wish to check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.